I hope so. Well, they didn't tell me either until I came in. So. Well, hello everybody. I think we're going to start because it's 10 after already, and I know that there might be still some people who are finding their way, finding a parking spot, finding their way from downstairs up here. But they'll just have to catch up when they get in. Okay?
Where's it going to be next week? Downstairs?
Okay, Maureen said it's going to be up here, so please pass the word around. We're back up here, which I like better. I hope you all, I think it's better. Although it is warm up here.
Usually it's cold.
We can't ride for losing. All right, so just like our little adventures right now and confusion about whether or not we're upstairs or downstairs and where to park and it's too hot, it's too cold, all of these things that have made our morning a little bit discombobulated. Today we're going to be studying a brand of folk tale that has several different genres. It's the brand of satire and humor in Jewish folklore. So, we're going to start out today with stories of Helm. Has anybody heard of stories of the stories of Helm? I'm going to call on you, but I've been asked, we're being taped actually for Staten Island Community Television. And all of our classes are going to be on Staten Island Community Television. So if I call on you, please maybe stand up and you can look at the camera if you like, and speak loudly so that when the tape comes out, we all look our best and can hear us. So who wants to tell me about Helm? What do you know about Helm?
Well, my father, I loved him. My mother, I loved her too, but my father would sometimes say to my mother when she did something not too smart, you're a Helmer. It's just like a Helmer. That was his way of saying, and I guess, putting it down.
In a way, yep.
The expression I grew up with was, you could be the mayor of Helm.
That's a really good one.
Things have changed. The thing I heard that they were basically very simple and not too good at foresight.
Yes. Very simple people, being simple meaning not too bright and not too able to, see the consequences of their actions. And so Helm stories became a vehicle, a prototype for telling stories which really are moralistic tales, allegories, a way of laughing at ourselves, poking fun, and also, though, pointing a finger at issues that were sometimes real.
I just have to add this. There's a house that's for sale on my street. And it says for sale, but there was no phone number. So I told my neighbor, this must be Telemite.
That's right. So Helm, it kind of became, in the Jewish lexicon, a reference to Helm means you're kind of stupid. And not too bright and not, or you leave something out that's so obvious anybody could see it, but you're very foolish.
How do you spell that?
Well, in English, it's C-H-E-L-M, Helm, C-H-E-L-M. So now, a little history. First of all, we kind of think that Helm is and sometimes it's even referred to as a mythological place. It's not a real place. However, there actually is a real Helm. And the real Helm is in what country? Poland. You want to say it nice and loud? Poland. Poland. Okay, so I don't think I have to make the connection. Unfortunately, there's lots of, forgive me for saying it, Polak jokes, right? That also Poles are often the same kind of way. They're a little dense. They don't see the obvious. They make foolish mistakes in Polak jokes also, and that is actually a carryover between both cultures, Christian and Jewish, from home stories from Poland, making fun of Poland in a way. Now, in reality, Chelm was, it was on that part of Poland that was often went in between Russia and Poland, Russia and Poland, Russia and Poland. And the first kind of documentation about people living in Chelm was like in the 900s. And from a very early time, although it's not clear exactly when Jews came to settle there, there was a very sizable Jewish population in Chelm. And even though it's often portrayed as a shtetl, which is a small village, Chelm actually was, in its time, a fairly large city of about 25,000, 30,000 people. Now, in the countryside around Chelm, there were also small villages and shtetls, and those, because they were right there near Chelm, they were also kind of considered Chelmische villages. How did Jews first come to Poland? Anybody know?
They must have been chased out of some other place.
They weren't chased out of some other place. Exactly right. Most notably, anybody know where they were chased out of? A wild guess? Well, it was Spain, but this is pre-Inquisition, because we're talking the 1900s, the 900s, the year 1000, the year 1100. So they actually were chased out of Andalusia, which was Spain, and had been for many, many, many years Muslim territory. Andalusia, Spain, was Muslim. Iberia was Muslim, until the Christians came down, the Visigoths and the Franks came down from Burgundy in France and invaded Spain and drove out the Muslims and the Jews and made Andalusia, Iberia, a Christian country. So once again, or once before, however you want to say it, in Jewish history, the Jews are scattered and there were lots of Jews living in Andalusia from the time of the Roman Empire until 900s when the Visigoths came down. So Jews scattered all over, and of course Poland, that part of the world at the time, was very feudal. It was, Dark Ages Europe, and feudal means that there was a lord who ruled over, who was given, autonomy to rule over a certain part of territory, and that lord owned all the land in that territory. And people lived on his territory by his grace, and they leased small subsistence farms for their own living, and also, some had larger farms, but they also did some small trading, marketplace selling of goods, things like that. There were usually towns associated with those lords. And in order to live in that territory, you had to do two things. One, you had to swear your loyalty to that lord. And two, you had to, and if in the event of battle, you had to fight. And two, you had to pay taxes and your rent to live on that, in that fiefdom. The Jews came over from Andalusia to a Dark Ages society where most people could not read or write. The Jews knew how to read and write, and not only did they know how to read and write, they knew arithmetic. And naturally became the accountants, if you will, and the tax collectors for the lords, for the feudal lords in feudal Poland. So, of course, the Jews that came to Poland in the beginning really thrived. They lived well, they were paid well, because they had businesses of going around their lord's territory, collecting the rent, collecting the taxes, which did not really make them very beloved to their Christian neighbors. They were seen, and that is actually where it really became a prevalent idea, anti-Semitic idea, that the Jews were the bloodsuckers, the money grubbers, the ones all out for money. It really all started because of that connection. So, a little history on Chelm. Chelm was a thriving city and really had a sizable Jewish population until World War II. And at times it waxed and waned in its influence in the region. And for a long time, especially in like the 1700s, going into the 1800s even, Chelm was a small but important center of Jewish life in Poland. It wasn't as big as Kiev or Lublin or some of the others there, but it still was fairly influential. So how did we get Chelm now to be thought of as the protagonist in stories that really make its inhabitants be the butt of its jokes? So there's lots of theories on that, and some of it is as well, they were kind of full of themselves, those Chelmites. In real life, they had it good. They thought they were superior to other people, and so people started making fun of them. And that's the most prevalent theory. So Jewish folk tales are always characterized by a particular time. Something's going on that's, a time in the year, a time in history. They're characterized by place, in the case we're going to study today, Chelm. And they're characterized by its characters. And in the Chelm story, Chelm is actually a character, if you think about it. And the characters in the stories are also obviously characters, but they're very simple people. They're not, nobody is given a name like, Amy Posner. It's always Shlomiel the milkman, or Yossel the rabbi's son, something very descriptive, but not real, but general. Descriptive, but general. And then the last part of a traditional Jewish folktale is that it will always have some sort of message underneath of it. So I gave you a handout. Okay? So this is called the Chelm Goat Mystery. Okay? Already it's funny, right? The rabbi of Chelm once fell gravely sick. While he could work wonders for others, he refused to use his supernatural powers for himself. Such a saint he was. So they had to do the next best thing and call the doctor. The doctor examined the holy man and shook his head. Bad, bad, he muttered to the Rebbitzin, the rabbi's wife. There's only one thing that can help him, a steady supply of fresh goat's milk. But for this, you've got to own a goat. My advice to you is, buy a goat. So the Rebbitzin asked two of the rabbi's disciples to go to the next village and buy a good nanny goat at a reasonable price. Trust us, cried the disciples, we'll bring you the best goat in Goatland. So they went to the next village and bought a white nanny goat. Are you sure it's a good nanny goat? The disciples asked the dealer just to make sure. Is it a good nanny goat? Cried the dealer, offended. Why, it gushes milk like a fountain. Delighted with their purchase, the disciples started for home, leading the goat by a rope. With such an animal, the rabbi will surely get well, they rejoiced. On the way, they came to an inn. Already in high spirits, the disciples said, let's drink to the health of our rabbi and his nanny goat. So, after tying their goat in a post to the stable, they went into the inn and they ordered some drinks. Made talkative by the schnapps, they began to boast before the innkeeper. Some goat we've just bought for our rabbi. It's positively the best goat in Goatland. It gushes milk like a fountain. There isn't another like it in Chelm. You don't say so, replied the innkeeper with amazement. Now, this innkeeper was an irreverent rogue. He had a hearty dislike for wonder-working rabbis, as well as for all the people of Chelm. Therefore, he plotted a mischievous prank against the rabbi's disciples. While they were merrily celebrating, he quietly slipped out into the stable. He untied the wonderful white nanny goat they bought, and in its place, he tied his own white billy goat. When the disciples had sobered up a bit, they paid the innkeeper, untied their goat, and continued on their homeward journey. They arrived in town before nightfall. In their eagerness to show off their purchase, they ran to the rabbi's house with the goat galloping behind them and a crowd of curious children trotting after the goat. When they reached the rabbi's house, the disciples called, "Rebbitzin, Rebbitzin, quick, come out and look at the wonderful goat we brought for you." "Really a fine goat," said the Rebbitzin judiciously. "The question is, does she give a lot of milk?" "Don't ask! Just milk her and you'll see for yourself," said the disciples, beaming. The Rebbitzin went for a stool and a pot and sat down to milk. She tried and tried, but no milk came. That's pretty dirty, right? I don't know what she was milking. "May such a misfortune happen to my enemy," she burst out angrily. "What kind of goat did you buy? She doesn't give a drop." "Oh, don't be so hasty, Rebbitzin," they implored her. "The Torah says specifically, everything has to be done with knowledge and understanding. Since you have never owned a goat before, let's call in a goat expert." So they called in a goat expert who took one look at the goat and he cried out in surprise, "This is no nanny goat, this is a billy goat." The disciples grew bitter. "That enemy of Israel," they cried, referring to the dealer in goats. "Tomorrow we'll take this wretched beast back to him and tell him a thing or two about the swindle." So the story goes on that I'll finish it for you, it's only another page. Early the next morning, the disciples, boiling with anger, started out with the goat. Again they passed the wayside inn. "Let's go in and cheer ourselves up with a drink," they said. After all, we don't have to make ourselves miserable on account of a flea-bitten goat. So after tying the goat in the stable, they went to the inn and ordered drinks. "What kind of a swindle do you suppose that dog of a goat dealer put over on us, I said to the innkeeper. "He gave us a billy goat instead of a nanny." "Tisk, tisk," exclaimed the innkeeper commiseratingly. "The trouble with you scholars is that you're so unworldly. You believe everything you're told. Why don't you keep your eyes open when you buy something?" To drown their humiliation, the disciples drank heavily, and while they were at it, the innkeeper went quietly into the stable, removed his own billy goat, and in his place he tied the nanny goat that he had taken from the disciples the day before. Through with their drinking, the disciples untied their goat and departed. They called out with rage when they saw the goat dealer. "Don't you think you can swindle honest folks so easily?" "What's wrong? What's wrong?" murmured the dealer in confusion. "What's wrong? You sold us a nanny. And what do you suppose when we got home? A billy." "I swear you're crazy," cried the dealer as he took but one look at the goat. "Malka," he called to his wife, "just milk this nanny for these fine scholars." The woman brought out a stool and a pot and began to milk the goat. The disciples stood by, their eyes popping out of their heads. There, right before their very eyes, the goat was streaming milk like a fountain. "Nu, Schlemiels, are you satisfied now?" he asked scornfully. Muttering their apologies, the rabbi's disciples took their goat and started for home. Elated, they burst into song. When they passed the inn again, one of them said, "Now we should really celebrate. Our goat is some gusher." So into the inn they went, ordered a big bottle of schnapps, and sure enough, while they were drinking to the health of the rabbi's goat, that rascal of the innkeeper stole away and once more exchanged the goats. Unsuspectingly, happy disciples returned home. But the same thing happened this time as before. When the Rebbitzin sat down to milk the goat, she discovered it was a billy. "There's witchcraft in this. With our own eyes we saw the dealer's wife milk this goat. We must tell the whole story to the rabbi." So in the end, of course, they figure it out, but I don't want to keep reading it because it goes on a little bit long. But that's a perfect example of, so let me just end it. For a long time, the rabbi sat deliberating, thinking about it. Rabbi Shmuel is a wise and upright man. If he tells us that the goat is a nanny, you can rest assured it's not a billy. Now you will ask, how is it that the goat he tells us is a nanny turns out to be a billy? The answer is very simple. True, the goat he examined and testified to as a nanny But such is the confounded luck of us Helmschmalzels that by the time a nanny goat finally reaches our town, it's sure to turn into a building. So that's just a good example. And the reason why I wanted to read that to you to start off with is because even though it's a folk tale and obviously humorous, Helm stories and Jewish folk tales in particular, as we spoke about earlier in the term, always have their foundation in Jewish texts, in Talmud, in Midrash, and Torah. So here is what the Talmud says, something that the Talmud says about goats, which is, I think, one of the things that inspires a story like that. Let me find where it is. Okay, all right. So this comes from Proverbs 27:26. Your clothing should be of the fleece of your own lambs. The he-goat's the price of a field. It is better for a person to sell his field and buy he-goats with the proceeds than to sell his he-goats and buy a field. The goat's milk will suffice for your food. A man will then find the goat's milk and the lambs in his house sufficient to provide for his sundry needs, and he need not slaughter the mothers for meat. So that's taken directly from Talmud, from Proverbs. It's about how it's better, instead of, slaughtering the female goats for meat, that you buy male goats, you mate the goats, obviously, so that you'll have female goats, and you don't need to decimate your herd or unduly take the life of an animal. Then there's a piece of the Talmud which talks about what to do when a goat is something to do with lost property. And this is here's the story from the Talmud. There is a story of a man who passed by the entrance to Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa's house and left behind some hens, which Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa's wife found. Rabbi Hanina said to her, "Do not eat any of their eggs." The chickens and the eggs kept multiplying and distressed Rabbi Hanina and his wife so much that he sold them and bought some goats with the proceeds. Then it happened that the man who lost the hens was passing by and said to his companions, Here's my hens. Rabbi Hanina overheard him and asked, "Do you have any mark to identify them?" The man said yes. He mentioned the mark and consequently was allowed to take the goats. So even though the Helm story about switching the goats and compensating for goats is a funny story, it has its roots in Talmudical literature. So now I gave you a handout for some other funny stories. And the handout gives a little bit of explanation about the stories of Helm. And it opens up with this one. A young scholar of Helm, innocent in the ways of earthly matters, was stunned one morning when his wife gave birth. Pell-mell he ran to the rabbi. "Rabbi," he blurted out, "an extraordinary thing has happened. Please explain it to me. My wife has just given birth, although we've been married only 3 months. How can this be? Everyone knows it takes 9 months for a baby to be born." The rabbi, a world-renowned sage, put on his silver-rimmed spectacles and furrowed his brow reflectively. "My son," he said, "I can see you haven't the slightest idea about such matters, nor can make the simplest calculation. Let me ask you, have you lived with your wife for 3 months? Yes. Has she lived with you for 3 months? Yes. Together, have you lived 3 months? Yes. What's the total then? 3 months plus 3 plus 3. 9 months, Rabbi. So, what's the problem?"
It's cute.
Isn't that cute?
Yeah.
So, we're going to skip the part about Motke Chabad because we're going to go into him next week. He was another character. And we'll skip the snow in Helm. Basically, the story of the snow in Helm is that the snow fell, and it was so beautiful, twinkling in the moonlight, that the Helmites thought it was filled with pearls and diamonds and silver. And so they made a rule forbidding anyone to walk on the snow until they could collect the treasure, because the town was short in its treasury. So, but how to let everyone know you can't walk, not to walk on the snow? They had to send a messenger out to go, tell everybody not to walk on the snow. But wait, one of them said, but if we send a messenger out, he'll walk on the snow and it'll ruin the snow. So they said, good idea, we better get some people to carry him. So they put him on a table and carried him, of course, the snow. So that's another, so they're so fun. So I love this next one, and it's called The Mixed Up Feet and the Silly Bridegroom. It's kind of in two parts. So who would like to read the Mixed Up Feet part? A good reader, somebody who will read nice and loud? Okay, but you have to stand up and come up here and read loudly so that because we're on TV now.
Near the city of Helm, there was a village called East Helm, where there lived a tenant farmer called Schmelke and his wife Schmelke Kitschke. They had 4 daughters, all of whom slept in the same broad bed. Their names were Jens, Hesha, Trina, and Dagmar. As a rule, the girls got up early in the morning to milk the cows and help their mother with the household chores. But one winter morning, they stayed in bed later than usual. When their mother came to see what was keeping them, she found all 4 struggling and screaming in the bed. Schmelkitschka demanded to know what all the commotion was about and why they were pulling each other's hair. The girls replied that in their sleep they had gotten their feet mixed up. And now they didn't know whose feet belonged to whom. And so, of course, they couldn't get up. As soon as she learned about her daughter's mixed up feet, Schmelkitschka, who was from Helm proper, became exceedingly frightened. She remembered that a similar event had taken place in Helm many years before, and oh, how much trouble there had been. She ran at once to a neighbor and begged her to milk the cows, and she herself set off for Helm to ask the town's elder what to do. Before she left, she said to the girls, "You stay in bed and don't budge until I return, because if once you get up with the wrong feet, it's difficult to set things right." When Schmelkitschka arrived in Helm and told the elder about what had happened to her daughters, he clutched his right beard with one hand, placed the other on his forehead, and was immediately lost in thought. As he pondered, he hummed a Helm melody. After a while, he said, "There is no perfect solution for a case of mixed up feet, but there is something that sometimes helps." He told Schmelkitschka to take a long stick, walk into the girls' room, and unexpectedly whack the blanket where their feet were. "It is possible," explained the wise elder, "that in surprise and pain, each girl will grab at her own feet and jump out of bed." A similar remedy had once been used in such a case, and it had worked. Many townspeople were present when the elder made his pronouncement, and as always, they admired his great wisdom. The elder stated further that in order to prevent such an accident in the future, it would be advisable to slowly marry off the girls. Once each girl was married and had her own home and her own husband, there would be no danger that they would get their feet mixed up again. Schmelkitschka returned to East Helm, picked up a stick, walked into her daughter's room, and whacked the quilt with all her might. The girls were completely taken aback, but before a moment had passed, they were out of bed, screaming in pain and fright, each jumping on her own feet. Schmelke, the father, and a number of neighbors who had followed Schmelkichka into the house and witnessed what had happened, again came to the conclusion that the wisdom of the elder of Helm knew no bounds. Continue. Schmelke and Schmelkichka immediately decided to carry out the rest of the elder's advice and started looking for a husband for their eldest daughter. They soon found a young man of Helm called Lemmel. His father was a coachman, and Lemmel himself already owned a horse and wagon. It was clear that Jente's future husband would be a good provider. When they brought the couple together to sign the marriage agreement, Jente began to cry. Bitterly, asked why she was crying, she replied, Lemmel is a stranger, and I don't want to marry a stranger. Didn't I marry a stranger, her mother asked. You married father, Jente answered, and I have to marry a total stranger. And her face became wet with tears. The match would have come to nothing, but luckily they had invited the elder of Helm to be present. After some pondering, he again found the way out. He said to Jente, sign the marriage contract. The moment you sign it, Lemmel becomes your fiancé. And when you marry, you will not be marrying a stranger, you will be marrying your betrothed. When Jente heard these words, she was overjoyed. Lemmel kissed the elder 3 times on his huge forehead, and the rest of the company praised the wisdom of the elder of Helm, which was even greater than that of wise King Solomon.
Okay, thank you. So, thank you. I know, there's more, I know.
It's not finished.
It's not finished, we're gonna finish it, but isn't that cute? Before we get on, the next part of it is the silly bridegroom. This story is really a story in 2 parts. But isn't that cute that the girls with their feet are mixed up, and the solution is take a stick and whack at the covers? I love that. And then they'll all jump up on their own feet, which they did do. So now we have a new problem. Neither Lemmel nor Jente had learned to sign their names. And I think so those of you who might be familiar with Yiddish culture know that Lemmel is often referred somebody as a Lemmel, right? A nitwit, right? So neither Lemmel and Jente is a Jente, somebody who can't stop reading. Neither Lemmel nor Jente had learned to sign their names. Again, the elder came to the rescue. Let Jente make 3 small circles on the paper and Lemmel 3 dashes. These will serve as their signatures and seal the contract. Jente and Lemmel did as the elder ordered, and everybody was gay and happy. Schmelkichka treated all the witnesses to cheese blintzes and borscht, and the first plate naturally went to the elder of Helm, whose appetite was particularly good that day. Before Lemmel returned to Helm proper, see, that's what I was telling you about, that Helm was the city, and then there was the little villages also were kind of, from where he had driven in his own horse and wagon, Schmelke gave him a gift of a small penknife with a mother-of-pearl handle. It happened to be the first day of Hanukkah, and the penknife was both an engagement gift and a Hanukkah present. Since Lemmel often came to East Helm to buy from the peasants the milk, butter, hay, oats, and flax, which he sold to the townspeople of Helm, he soon came to visit Jente again. Schmelke asked Lemmel whether his friends in Helm had liked his penknife, and Lemmel replied they had never seen it. Why not? Schmelke asked. Because I lost it. How did you lose it? I put the penknife into the wagon and it got lost in the hay. Schmelke was not a native of Helm, but came from another nearby town, and he said to Lemmel, you don't put a penknife into a wagon full of straw and hay and with cracks and holes in the bottom to boot. A penknife you place in your pocket, and then it does not get lost. Oh, you see, he wasn't from Helm, so he knew that. Future father-in-law, you are right, Lemmel answered. Next time I will know what to do. Since the first gift had been lost, Schmelke gave Lemmel a jar of freshly fried chicken fat to replace it. Lemmel thanked him and returned to home. Wouldn't it be nice if things were so easy as a pen knife chicken fat these days? Since the first gift had been lost, I read that. Several days later, when business again brought Lemmel to East Town, Jente's parents noticed that his coat pocket was torn and the entire left side of his coat was covered with grease stains. "What happened to your coat?" Schmelke asked. Lemmel replied, "I put the jar of chicken fat in my pocket, but the road is full of holes and ditches and I could not help bumping against the side of the wagon. The jar broke and tore my pocket and the fat ran out all over my clothes." "Why did you put the jar of chicken fat into your pocket?" Schmelke asked. "Didn't you tell me to?" "A penknife you put into your pocket. A jar of chicken fat you wrap in paper and place in the hay so that it will not break." Lemmel replied, "Next time I'll know what to do." Since Lemmel had little use of the first two gifts, Jente herself gave him a silver gulden, which her father had given her as a Hanukkah gift. A gulden is a coin. It was a coin for the time. When Lemmel came to the village again, he was asked how he spent the money. "I lost it," he replied. "How did you lose it?" "I wrapped it in paper and placed it in the hay. But when I arrived in Chelm and unloaded my merchandise, the gulden was gone." "A gulden is not a jar of chicken fat," Schmelke informed him. "A gulden you put into your purse." "Next time I will know what to do." Before Lemmel returned to Chelm, Jente gave her fiancé some newly laid eggs, still warm from the chickens. On his next visit, he was asked how he had enjoyed the eggs, and he replied they had all been broken. "How did they break?" "I put them into my purse, but when I tried to close it, the eggs broke." "Nobody puts eggs into a purse," Schmelke said. "Eggs you put into a basket bedded with straw and covered with a rag so they won't break. Next time I'll know what to do." Since Lemmel had not been able to enjoy the gifts he had received thus far, Jente decided to present him with a live duck. When he returned, he was asked how the duck was faring, and he replied that she had died on the way to Chelm. "How did she die?" "I placed her in a basket with straw, covered it well with rags, just as you told me to, and when I arrived home, the duck was dead." "A duck has to breathe," Schmelke said. "If you cover it with rags, it will suffocate. A duck you put in a cage with some corn to eat, and then she will arrive safely." This just goes on and on. The next is Jente gives him her goldfish, a pet she had had for several years, and again on his return he replied it was dead. Why? He put it in the cage and gave it some corn, but when he arrived it was dead. Boy, she's going to go through with this marriage.
Yeah, right.
Since Lemmel was still without a gift, Jente decided to give him her canary, which she loved dearly. But Schmelke told her that it seemed pointless to give Lemmel any more gifts, because whatever you gave him either died or got lost. Instead, Schmelke and Schmelkitschke decided to get the advice of the elder of Chelm. The elder listened to the whole story and as usual clutched his long white beard with one hand and placed the other on his high forehead, and after much pondering and humming, the road between East Chelm and Chelm is fraught with all kinds of dangers, and that is why such misfortunes occur. The best thing to do is have a quick marriage. Then Lemmel and Jente will be together, and Lemmel will not have to drag his gifts from one place to another, and no misfortunes will befall them. This advice pleased everyone, and the marriage was soon celebrated. All the peasants of the village of East Chelm and half the town people of Chelm danced and rejoiced at the wedding. Before the year was out, Jente gave birth to a baby girl, and Lemmel went to tell the elder of Chelm the good tidings that a child had been born to them. Is the child a boy? No. Is it a girl? How did you guess? Lemmel asked the policeman. And the elder of Chelm replied, "For the wise men of Chelm, there are no secrets." Those are a couple of the stories. There's lots of very famous Chelm stories. Does anybody have one that they remember that they'd like to?
There was a town.
All right, you have to talk loudly. Just remember.
There was a town where they had one shoemaker and one tailor, and there was a crime committed by the shoemaker. They had two, and one got this mixed up. And they said, well, we have to kill the one that they only had
He
one
wants
of.
you to turn around so you can see you in the camera.
I'm getting stage fright. Anyway, well, what happened is, they killed the one that they had one of. They said, but he was innocent. They said, yeah, but we have two of him and one of the other, so they killed the one. Okay, I botched this up, okay.
It used to be Schlemiel and Schlemazel.
Well, Schlemiel and Schlemazel, yeah, we're gonna go into Schlemiel and Schlemazel next week. Because Schlemiel and Schlemazel were two, they were also, you know, Helmites, but who knows the difference, we could do it this week, fine. Who knows the difference between a Schlemiel and a Schlemazel?
I think the Schlemiel buys the suit that has 2 pairs of pants with the jacket, and the Schlemazel burns a hole in the jacket.
So did everybody hear that? Okay, the Schlemiel buys the suit with a coat and 2 pairs of pants, the Schlemazel burns a hole in the jacket. They're both crazy, but that's a very good description of what is a Schlemiel and what is a Schlemazel. And as you know, this kind of humor has permeated popular culture in many, many ways. Even still today, Jewish humorists, you know, we have Woody Allen. Woody Allen's humor, a lot of his wacky movies that, you know, are almost a little bit surreal and have a touch of magic to them, they're all based in, you know, in traditional Jewish folklore.
Schlemiel found its way into the Times crossword puzzle this week.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, so if you're doing the Times crossword puzzle, now you know one of the answers to the clue. When you think of not only current, like Woody Allen, who else is a modern day comic? Billy Crystal, lots of you know Jewish influence into his
Jerry
humor.
Seinfeld.
Jerry Seinfeld.
Mel Brooks.
Mel Brooks, all of them, you know, it's the story of fools and how Jerry Seinfeld's a perfect example of Helmite. He and his little crew in the Seinfeld show, they were all Helmites doing stupid things all the time that everybody else could see, you know, the viewer could see what was gonna happen a mile away and they could never see it. Mel Brooks, you said? Who said? Mel Brooks? Definitely Mel Brooks, also the same thing. Poking fun at the human condition in kind of a satirical way, and often with a little undertone of magic along with it too, right? Woody Allen.
The names Schlemiel and Schlemazel were in the theme song for Laverne and Shirley.
That's right.
Right, that's right.
She said Schlemiel and Schlemazel were in Laverne and Shirley, that old television show, you know, back from the 70s.
Neil Simon.
Neil Simon, always a comedy of errors with Neil Simon. And what makes Jewish humor and Jewish humor stories a little bit different is that it's always slightly satirical. There's always a little bit, along with the funniness, there's always a little bit of, you know, acerbicness in it.
How about the writers of Fiddler on the Roof?
Well, Shalom Aleichem, you know, Fiddler on the Roof is based on Shalom Aleichem stories. And Shalom Aleichem stories are directly, they're redactions directly of historical Jewish folklore, all of his stories. If you think about Tevye the milkman, right there we have, it's a mule, it's a horse, it's a mule. That's exactly the same thing we had with the goat story this morning, right? Just a little bit differently told.
Spamalot has a, without Jews, there would be no theater.
Yes, that's true.
And there's a whole, they have a whole song of that.
Well, that's Monty Python. I don't know if Monty Python is Jewish or not. I mean, that's not his real name. Does anybody know if he's Jewish or not? But even so, it does permeate popular culture.
John Rivers.
Absolutely.
Very self-deprecating.
Very, it's a thank you, Seth, because it's a self-deprecating humor.
Jews telling jokes. I saw that show and that was all about.
Yeah. Did anybody else see that?
I saw it.
Jews telling, that was funny.
But there's another one.
Oh, Jews telling.
I'm too young.
Bad Jews.
Yeah, bad Jews. I haven't seen that one yet.
Amy, on the back in the footnotes, it says Maurice Sendak. What, did he
folklore pictures for one of the books or something?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, I mean, obviously, I printed this, so where Maurice Sendak comes is that I got this from an article that was in, I honestly, I guess I cut off the website, but it was a website, and the article was illustrated with Elm stories, and it was Maurice Sendak's illustration. Also, Maurice Sendak was also Jewish, and his stories also had a lot of elements of Jewish folklore in them. And that where do you think that self-deprecating humor comes from? That's a good idea. Where do you think that self-deprecating humor comes from? Why do you think that's part of the stories and part of?
Probably survival, you know, not to take the world so seriously, having gone through persecution and bad things, you know, you make fun of yourself.
Right. That's exactly right.
That's what Mel Brooks did with Hitler.
Yeah. Oh,
Yes,
God.
yes.
Forgot about that
No, but he
springtime with
claimed
Hitler.
that if he didn't laugh at him and didn't poke fun at him and make him stupid, that he could not live with what had happened.
That's
This was
right.
his way to attack it.
That's right. And a lot of people,
Would Jackie Mason fall into that
he
category?
absolutely does. He absolutely
What
does.
about Jack Benny?
And Jack Benny. So if you think of, and Milton Berle, you think of all these comics and all these writers, they were all Jews. They all had this kind of self-deprecating satire, a little bit of acerbicness to it, poking fun at themselves, poking fun at some other protagonists like Hitler. And Mel Brooks, a lot of people, when he did that Springtime for Hitler, people were very offended, but he said he had to do that or else he couldn't have lived. He had to make Hitler into a buffoon, or he couldn't have lived with that.
It's interesting because a lot of the black comics, it's the same thing. They poke fun at themselves in response to all the, racism and everything.
Right.
So,
Exactly right, and it's different, right, if a Jewish person is making these jokes or telling these stories about Jewish people than it is if a non-Jewish or a non-black person.
Right.
Mel Brooks also did the 2,000-year-old man, before 2000.
That's true.
You know, the song in Cabaret that got the most flack was the one where he sings to the monkeys. She
Yeah.
doesn't look Jewish at all. And at the beginning, there was such an uproar against that till the audience became more sophisticated and realized it was really a satire parody.
Yeah, but it may or may not have been a satire parody because that was the beginnings of Nazi Germany. And that's actually a very good case of a non-Jew because, Joel Grey was not Jewish, and the character, Joel Grey is Jewish?
His father was Mickey Katz.
Okay, so I
The
stand.
character wasn't Jewish.
But his character wasn't Jewish.
wasn't
So
Jewish.
that character, what was his name? The MC,
or
the
whatever it was,
entertainer. He was not Jewish, so that was that was the popular culture. So there's a difference between making fun of yourself, the point I'm trying to make with Joel Grey being Jewish, is that you can make fun of yourself or your own kind, but when you start making fun of other people, it draws the line, right? So,
Humor is also, because we've always been exiled and moved and chased, I think humor was a form of survival.
that's right.
And
Humor was a
coping.
form of survival. And not only was it a form of survival and coping, but it also, there's a story that talks about a Hasidic rabbi who rather than telling, than sitting around the Shabbat table, the Sabbath table, telling, reading Torah stories, made it his business to spend the afternoon of the Sabbath telling anecdotes, stories, humorous things, jokes, a little bit of silliness. And when he was confronted by another rabbi with how dare you desecrate the Sabbath with frivolity and not taking it seriously, the first rabbi said, what is life if there's not a message in it that we should appreciate it, laugh, enjoy and, you know, take the funny, and recognize the funny with the good. That's also a God-given thing.
Laughter is best medicine.
And that is a perfect, laughter is the best
I
medicine.
think the only comedians who've gotten away with making fun of others are those who make fun of everybody.
Yeah.
Like Don Rickles, I was trying to think of his name. And he used to say that, he makes fun of everybody, so
Yeah.
nobody can take it personally.
That's right, that's right. And you know, there are boundaries, I think, in entertainment. You know, not now so much as there used to be, but people do kind of respect those boundaries and something.
I was gonna say something about Mel Brooks. I remember a friend of mine years ago saw the movie
You gotta
Blazing
speak up
Saddles.
a little.
Blazing Saddles.
Right.
He was seeing it out west in Utah, Wisconsin, I forgot where he was. And there's a scene where the Indians are
Yes.
on
Right.
fire and start to speak Yiddish.
Yes.
Well, he got hysterical.
Yeah.
Everybody
Nobody
in
else
the
knew.
audience didn't understand why he's hysterical, because he understood whatever they were saying.
Right. There's also a story of two baseball players in the early day of baseball on the same team who were Jews. And it's the pitcher and the catcher. And they're both Jews, and they're giving each other instructions in Yiddish, thinking that the batter isn't going to understand them. And the batter, of course, hits a home run and runs around, and he comes back and he goes, and he says to them, I don't speak Yiddish, unfortunately, but he says to them, what, you think you're the only ones who speak Yiddish? So because everybody took different names, they didn't realize it.
I just had to tell you my own experience. I had gone to see, Dr. Zhivago. Unfortunately, I understand Yiddish. I don't know if you do, but I was taking the movie very seriously, and people in back of me, the man said to his wife, at the scene when Dr. Zhivago goes to town, his wife sends him there to amuse himself. He goes, finds the library, and there is his lover. And the man said to his wife, the vibe hat him a weggeschickt, hat sich nach Hause gemacht. The wife sent him away and he took pleasure. But in Yiddish, it's funny. In translation, it's just a story. But because of my own experience of sitting there and listening, that was the end of Dr. Zhivago. I never took it seriously. It was his interpretation.
So we've got to tie it up, so we'll end with a story along those same lines, which is going to lead us into next week's characters, Yiddish characters that we're going to be talking about.
Should we bring these again?
No, you don't have to. But this one's name is Motke Chabad. And Motke Chabad, and we're going to be talking about him and a guy named Herschel Ostropoler next week. But they were famous bodkans. Does anybody know what a bodkan is? I'm giving you a preview for next week's lesson. A bodkan was like a jester, and people would hire a bodkan to come to weddings and simchas and make jokes and sing. And they were the archetypal bodkans. So Motke Chabad is sitting around the synagogue one afternoon, just shooting the breeze with his friends. And Yossi says, you know, when I die, I want to be buried next to the rabbi. The rabbi was such a wonderful man. I'd like to be buried next to him. The other guy says, you know what? When I die, I want to be buried next to Herschel. Herschel was a wonderful man. He was the wealthiest man in town. He gave a lot of charity. When I die, I want to be buried next to him. Mordke says, you know what? When I die, I want to be buried next to Rachel, the daughter of the richest man in town. And the two other fellas look at him and say, what are you saying? Rachel's not dead. And he said, what, so? I have to be dead too? So I blew the end of it. In Yiddish, apparently, there's also a double entendre. I'll bring it next week in the Yiddish, so those of you Yiddish speakers can enjoy it. And thank you for coming. We're back on this track. I do want to give one little push, though, for my lecture series, my books. I saw you sign up.
Yes, I did.
Doing it, or is the author going to be? The author?
The author.
The author.
The author's going to be there, and I know it is $25. It's to support Hillel, and we really need the help with our programmatic. So if you would like one, but don't sign up on the website here. Call me to sign up, or just come on Sunday and bring a check, because this website had problems. It's at the college, at the Center for the Arts. It's this Sunday at 10:30. And if you just come, you can give me a check that day, it's fine. Okay, thank you all.
I signed up. Yes.
It's always a pleasure. What could happen?